Hello and welcome to the first ever Making the Cut Sports Podcast. I'm Matthew. I'm a senior in high school. I plan on attending Indiana University. As you can see, if you're watching the video portion of this, which with that being said, if you aren't watching the video portion of this, check out the YouTube channel Making the Cut Sports Podcast on YouTube, or you can check it out on Spotify at the exact same location, as well as on Instagram. MTC Sports Podcast is the username. And I'm super excited to start this podcast. Really, it's just going to be talking about the stuff that I love, and that's sports. I spent a lot of my life watching sports, obviously, and I wanted to take that love for sports and spread it with other people and talk about sports and potentially give some hot topic, hot debate ideas, and potentially work to grow in the media industry and hopefully become more experienced before college, where I hope to study sports media and continue a career where I can also talk about my love of sports and share that with everyone else. So with that being said, I think the first thing I should probably do is talk about my favorite teams. And I think that's important because it'll kind of set up what most of this podcast is probably going to be talked about, especially if these teams are currently playing. So when it comes to NFL football, my favorite team is the Jacksonville Jaguars. When it comes to NBA, I don't watch a whole lot of NBA, but I do cheer for the Pacers since I do live in Indiana. For college basketball and college football, it's obviously the Hoosiers. With a dabble of Butler basketball, I've always been a big Butler basketball fan. And then when it comes to MLB baseball, I cheer for the Chicago Cubs. So with spring training underway, we're going to be probably talking about baseball a little bit more here in the future. And then with NHL, I'm just starting to get into that. And I'll go down the reason why, and potentially that'll be one of the topics I discuss today in this first podcast. But when it comes to the NHL, I just started cheering for the Boston Bruins. So I'm super excited to potentially learn more about the sport of hockey and grow into that fan base. So what I wanted to talk about in this first podcast is probably one of the things with one of my favorite teams that is very important and it gave me a lot of pain this year, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars downfall. And I kind of want to just give my thoughts on that and what I believed was the cause, what I believed was the reason for this downfall to occur. So if you're listening to this podcast, if you're a football fan, you may remember the Jacksonville Jaguars were a team that was nearly and were first in the AFC for just a little bit of time. If they were to win a game on Monday Night Football against the Cincinnati Bengals in Jacksonville, they were going to be the number one seed in the AFC for that period of time. However, Trevor Lawrence in the fourth quarter of that game got hurt and had a high ankle sprain, which at the time looked way worse than what that was. And so earlier in the game, Christian Kirk got hurt, so potential wide receiver 1/wide receiver 2 injured for the Jacksonville Jaguars. That means you have to rely on Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, Parker Washington, who stepped up that game. But with that, even with that, Zay Jones struggled on the injury bus all season long as well. And so this team had just really, really struggled with that. Offensive line injuries. Now our quarterback's getting hurt. Wide receivers are getting hurt. Everything is going downhill here. And I think that's exactly where it started. It all started with that Christian Kirk injury on the very first offensive play for the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he had a lower body issue. And you could tell the Jags offense before then and during that game was spectacular. They scored 31 points. They really had done a great job that entire season. But the thing that really hurt that team from then on out was their defense. And I mean, I think it was the talk of the town. Jake Browning throwing for over 300 yards, getting his team to win in overtime by scoring over 30 points. That's just unacceptable, especially when you look at it. You had a Josh Allen interception inside the 10-yard line. The Jags were getting set up in so many opportunities, yet were failing to convert. And this team was really starting to fail at what they were doing so good in previous weeks. And I think that's where it all started. And then you look at the games following then. You had the Browns game, which Trevor Lawrence miraculously in less than a week had come back from his high ankle sprain and found a way to play, but I don't even know if it was for the betterment of the team as they lost against a tough Browns defense, especially when they're at home, which, you know, when they're not, especially seen against the Texans in the AFC wild card, they're not as good. Then they went on to play Sunday Night Football against the Ravens. A lot of miscues there. Trevor Lawrence dropped the football when he was literally just running. You had a play inside the 5 where the ball got caught in bounds. Time ran out in the first half. The Jags really needed that score. Instead, they went into half down 10 to nothing. Then from there, you had losses to teams like the Buccaneers. You had a lucky win. I wouldn't say lucky, but you had a win against the Panthers after Trevor Lawrence had another injury, an AC joint sprain. He had a concussion in that span. He was getting banged up, and it all starts with the quarterback. If you don't have a solid quarterback, your team's not going to succeed. And we saw that through those 6 weeks of the season, and I think it was made very evident in the last week of the season, which I got the privilege of going to see. It was only around a 4-hour drive to Tennessee. I was super excited, super pumped to see my team play. And then, the nervousness set in, obviously, because it's a win, an in situation, or a lose and go home situation. And this team had given me so much heart pain throughout the 6 weeks that it was struggling. And from there, it did not go well. I mean, the Jags were in that game for probably like 3 minutes, it seemed. Like they got the field goal on the first possession. Titans came back. Derrick Henry's just running over this offense. And thankfully, Derrick Henry should be leaving the division, hopefully, as long as he doesn't go to a team like Houston. But I think he's out of Tennessee, which is big for the AFC South because he's absolutely dominated the Jags in his entire career. But, this Jags team, they had the Calvin Ridley bomb there. It was 10-7, and you felt confidence, but you also had seen over the past 5 weeks that this Jags team did not have the same kind of grit, the same kind of mentality that they had before then in the previous 11 weeks. And so, Jags get down to multiple scores. Tennessee gets the ball at halftime. The Jags are struggling. They get a lucky miscue before the end of the half, forced against Tennessee, where the punter dropped the ball. They were able to get 3 points. But the Jags were able to get an Andre Sisco interception up 28-20. And, as a fan there, I was super excited. But I also knew from what I had seen, I didn't know if the Jags were going to be able to get in. And then, what do you know? The Jags get stopped on 4th and goal after running a play action from the 1-yard line or the 2-yard line. It was a really struggle season. Different Jags fans have different reasons to blame, which I'll go into here, what I personally believe was the true reason for this downfall. But it was a tough season. It was a tough season, especially after you were 99% chance to make the playoffs, 8-3. And here we are, Jags fans sitting at home, not happy because they didn't even get a chance to compete for a Super Bowl this year, especially in a year where you brought in a wide receiver like Calvin Ridley, who you thought was going to elevate this offense more than it had. With Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, they found a way to get it done. Evan Ingram, so the Jags were getting it done. They added a couple pieces in the offseason. You thought they would be able to do good. Obviously, they lost Jawan Taylor to the Chiefs. They lost Arden Key to the Titans, but they also brought in some talent. And so, with the rookie right tackle, Anton Harrison, and, you felt like this team was going to be able to succeed, but they didn't. And I'm not going to necessarily push off my hatred. Like, what I mean is, I think there are a lot of Jags fans that are anxious for next season, knowing that, is this the same old Jags? We've seen it before. The Jags 2018 Jacksonville defense were able to succeed, were able to get to the quarterback. The defense won them those games. Blake Bortles had himself a heck of a season. The Jags give him a bag. All of a sudden he falls off, does absolutely nothing. And, I love Blake Bortles, but, he struggled in his career. And, for being taken with the 2nd or 3rd overall pick out of UCF, that hurts this team, especially with the talent that they could have had. And so, the Jags... I think that there's potential for next year. Now, my reason for I think the downfall is there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, the injury bug, that's going to hurt you. And, when your quarterback is out, when you've got offensive line injuries, when your wide receiver 1 or 2 is out, when your wide receiver 3 is out, there's so many problems that can come from that. Travis Etienne, I think he struggled a little bit with the injury there as well. The team had a lot of injuries, which we didn't see the year before, the year that they were able to make the AFC divisional round, the year that people thought the Jags may be something special in the future. And now all of a sudden, the Jags are clowned upon once again, and people don't trust in Trevor Lawrence. He's had a little bit of trouble when it comes to turning the ball over, which I'll touch upon here later. But when it comes to the downfall, I think I blame it on injuries, and most particularly, I blame it on the offensive line and the defense. This defense was doing so spectacular. They were leading the league in turnovers forced. They were doing so good throughout those 11 weeks of the season, and then all of a sudden, they're giving up 30 to Baker Mayfield. They shut out the Panthers, which, was going to be a hope for the next game against the Titans, but then when they play the Titans, Derrick Henry runs all over them. They get absolutely clobbered by a backup quarterback in Ryan Tannehill, who obviously has had starting experience, but they still failed in the game that mattered most. And, it was a sucky drive back to Indiana, but, I still love this team, and I still do believe that this next year they can compete with the best of the best. But when it comes to the offensive line, you can look at statistics, you can look at whatever, but that offensive line was not good. When your center Luke Fortner is getting shoved back when he's supposed to be the guy driving it forward, he's supposed to be the big man, and he really struggled in that position. And so I don't know if that means the Jags need to bring in another offensive lineman to fill in for him. What needs to be done? Obviously, Cam Robinson was riddled with injuries. He was put on IR. He missed the first couple games of the season due to PED suspension. There was so many things, I think, that caught up to the Jags. And like I think it was Doug Peterson said in the press conference, the year before they got lucky, because normally that doesn't happen where you don't have the injury bug. Trevor Lawrence got hurt against the Lions, came back the next week, and he did fine. Obviously he was on the injured report every week, but he was still able to play through that injury. Your wide receivers did fine. Zay Jones was healthy. Evan Ingram was healthy. Christian Kirk was healthy. And then you bring in another offensive talent in Calvin Ridley, who's coming off of a couple years suspension. So obviously you suspect a little bit of rust, but I don't know if I suspected as much rust as he gave. He had multiple dropped touchdowns, multiple dropped big catches, but he also had those big catches in the moments as well, like against the Titans. Against the Bills, he was catching first down after first down against that defense. And, he is a special talent. I hope that the Jaguars find a way to bring him back, whether that be through the franchise tag or re-signing him. I think it's going to be a little bit of a difficult situation, especially because of what's going to have to be given up because of that. The Jags traded a compensatory pick, or they traded a third-round pick for Calvin Ridley. And if they re-sign him, it becomes a second. So I think a lot of Jags fans, even the management, is a little bit scared because of the fact he was so he was not able to constantly play the same. He was having games where he would go off for 100 yards the next game, especially if you're a fantasy football fan, you'll know this. He'd do nothing. Trevor would try to give him the ball, but nothing would happen. And so I think a lot of fans are scared of giving him that money, especially with the amount of money that people are suspecting he's going to get from other teams in offers if he makes it to free agency. So with that, I think what I would do if I were the Jags is, first off, you got Josh Allen, who had a heck of a year. Pro Bowl wasn't even like a backup. He was there. He was a Pro Bowler, and he had a heck of a season. I think he deserves a lot of money, and I think he deserves, hopefully, to come back to Jacksonville. Hopefully the management realizes that. And, especially with the new defensive coordinator and Ryan Nielsen, this team has so much potential. He did a heck of a job in Atlanta, even with, I would consider, a somewhat lackluster defense. You did have Jesse Bates, you did have AJ Terrell, but he was able to get it done a lot of the games. And Atlanta's always in that weird space where they're in it, but they're not. And we saw that the last week of the season, they were still in a playoff chance, but they didn't make it because of a Buccaneers win. And also because they lost. Or was that this? Never mind. But anyway, I think the Jags' first off priority when it comes to this offseason is re-sign Josh Allen. Second priority is tag Calvin Ridley. You can do what you wish with that. You could trade him. I personally would not. I really liked him. I think he had I was somewhat back and forth on him, bipolar in a way, because I originally was unsure, or I was super pumped about it then I became a little bit unsure. The Chiefs game, he struggled. Obviously that game in and of itself was a struggle. And, you got to give credit to that Chiefs defense. Steve Spagnuolo, in my opinion, my favorite defensive coordinator, one of my favorite coaches in the NFL. He did a heck of a job, and you saw it in the Super Bowl when they found a way to beat the star-studded 49ers. But then after that, you've got the Calvin Ridley, you got the Josh Allen. A lot of Jags fans are wanting to potentially cut guys like Cam Robinson and Zay Jones for cap space purposes. And I think it's a little bit difficult because of the fact that the Jags offensive line is so bad right now. It seems like your only bright spot from last year was Anton Harrison, who did a great job for rookie right tackle. Chris Jones said it himself. He said he was going to be a star right tackle someday in the NFL. But you got guys like Brandon Sheriff, who's getting paid a lot of money, really was not that good. Cam Robinson, the same thing. He was injured. He got suspended, and in the games he did play, he wasn't that effective. From the blind side. So I think a lot of Jags fans are a little bit worried about that, as well as the cornerbacks situation. And this goes on to the defense. The defense, other than Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, and maybe Foye Oluokun, was lackluster in and of itself. Tyson Campbell was looking to potentially become an all-pro cornerback after last year, and then he gets hurt. And all of a sudden, he really just could not put it together after coming back from injury. Darius Williams did a heck of a job with the pass deflections. He was one of the top in the league. But there was so much room for improvement with this team. And, you can especially see this in the final game of the season against the Titans. It's tackling. This team has struggled with tackling ever since I started watching them. They struggled with tackling last year. Hopefully they can figure out a way to do it this year, because something has got to change with that. So there's obviously a lot of changes that potentially need to be made. There's a lot of things you can put on the Jags for the reason why they failed. You could blame it on Trevor. You could. I won't, because I personally am a big believer in Trevor Lawrence. I believe he deserves a contract extension this offseason. I don't care what any Jags fans say. They said it about Josh Allen too. They said, let's wait an offseason, let's pay him next season. Well, guess what? Now Josh Allen needs like $30 million a year, and you have the potential to not even re-sign him. Trevor Lawrence, you don't want to get in that situation where you're unsure about a future quarterback. I think Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback of the future for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think one season that was injury-riddled for the second half should not be the deciding factor on if you think Trevor Lawrence is a bust or not. He had a tough rookie season. That was obvious. Urban Meyer, it was a tough situation. Second season, started the season a little bit. He started the season great. Then they went on that long losing streak, and you were like unsure about what to do. And then he turned it on in the second half of the season. Everyone was considering a top 10, top 5 quarterback. Then we go to this year. He's starting great. Not like the best season, but that's because Travis Etienne took off. And then guess what? Once your offensive line gets hurt, once your offensive line kind of loses a little bit of experience, Travis Etienne was non-existent the second half of the season, which is really stinks because he was unbelievable in the first half. But Trevor Lawrence, I think the only thing that you could put on Trevor Lawrence as to why this team failed was because of the turnover ball. And I don't think it's really necessarily the interception. I think it's the fumbling. We saw it against the Bills. We saw it against the Ravens. We've seen it multiple times. We saw it against the Colts in the first game of the season. And the Jags should have gotten that ball back, but Tank Bigsby was kind of in his own space there. He didn't know what to do. It was his first game of the regular season, first time on an NFL field, so I don't blame him that much. And I think he can improve a lot as well. But the Jags, Trevor Lawrence, he's in my opinion one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think the league will see that after next year. We'll talk about it eventually, I'm sure, in this podcast in a couple months, especially with training camp coming up here. Not too long, but enough of the Debbie Downers. Let's talk about the future of the Jags. Let's talk about what they can do to get better. And I think that there are a couple things that I would do in particular. So, first thing I would do if I'm the Jags is with my 17th overall pick, I'm drafting Jackson Powers-Johnson, one of the top players in his position, interior O-line, plays the center. I think the thing that the Jags have got to do is replace their center. And I talked about it earlier, Luke Fortner. I think he could be a good backup center, but the way that this Jags team has the ability to run the football and the fact that they're struggling because of their offensive line, that's a problem, especially when you've got a talent like Travis Etienne. Another thing I would do, I talked about Steve Spagnuolo and his defense, and one person that I really, really like from that defense is L'Jarius Sneed. I think the Jags should go after potentially trying to trade for him or pick him up in free agency. I'm not sure if he's been franchise tagged or not or re-signed, but he is a terrific cornerback. Then from there, the Eagles allowed Hassan Reddick to seek a trade. I think that the Jags could potentially go after Hassan Reddick, re-sign Josh Allen. You've got your two offensive linebackers, or outside linebackers, and then you got Trayvon Walker. And what a lot of Jags fans have said over the past year or two is that Trayvon Walker succeeded on the inside in college, and so the Jags need to give him more opportunities to do that. Mike Caldwell and the Jags defensive staff and their scheming did not allow that a whole lot. We barely saw that. I think it was mostly in the Panthers game where we saw that Trayvon Walker from the interior. And I think that if you put him in the interior, he has the ability to succeed, especially if you've got Josh Allen and Hassan Reddick coming off the outsides. It's going to take away a lot of the focus on that interior and make sure that those two star-studded linebackers can't get to the quarterback. That allows for a guy like Trayvon Walker, who's got the speed, who's got the athleticism, who's got the strength to get the job done and get to the quarterback. He had a 10-sack season, a drastic improvement. He was being talked down upon so much after last season, especially with Aiden Hutchinson playing the way he is, which he is a dog. But I believe in Trayvon Walker. I think he can be a great Jaguars defensive lineman. And then from there, obviously I talked about re-signing Josh Allen. I talked about Calvin Ridley. I think that's basically it for me. I think you got to focus on the cornerbacks. You got to focus on the offensive line. And then I also believe you could potentially go out and get a wide receiver, especially if the Jags don't re-sign Calvin Ridley and give up their second-round pick. I think you could go after a wide receiver in that second round or a cornerback, whatever you choose to do. So with the Jags, I think that's probably it for now. I guess I'll go ahead and talk about, it is March now, the day of this recording. March Madness is coming up. I'm super excited about that. And I think I'll tell you my team. One interruption there. But on the March Madness topic, I was about to say who I think is going to win it all. And the team that I think has the talent, has the ability to win it all is North Carolina. This is a team that was ranked as high as third this season. Lost two games, I believe, to some unranked opponents that dropped them down a little bit. But this is a team with a Player of the Year candidate in R.J. Davis who has the ability to succeed. Armando Bacot, one of the nation's best big men. This team can get it done. When it comes to some teams I think I don't trust to win, and maybe it could be from personal bias, but maybe it could be from seasons past, but it's the Purdue Boilermakers. You can see it in Instagram comments. I think it depends on your fan base. Obviously I'm an IU fan, so I'm not going to cheer for the Boilers in any way, shape, or form. And I believe Zach Edey gets calls that he won't get in March. We've seen it. I think that's why the Purdue Boilermakers have failed like the past 2 years where he has played. And it's because he's getting calls in the Big Ten that I don't think he'd get normally. There's sometimes where guys are going straight up, they'll call the foul, it is what it is. But I think that's a team that has the ability, especially with the mindset that they'll probably go into March with. This is a team that's probably seen on social media, on all of these outlets, that they've struggled against these types of teams in March. And I think that's going to give them a kind of mentality that's going to scare them into potentially playing bad or playing good. It depends on what happens, Another team I don't know if I believe in is Arizona. And the reason I say that with Arizona is because of the fact that they're so different, depending on the games. Arizona has beaten some good teams, but then there's another game where they'll play absolutely terrible. Obviously we've not seen that a whole lot this year, but when you're in March, you can't make those mistakes, especially because it's a win or go home situation. Other than North Carolina, I think some sleepers that you could potentially think about. Obviously, the Dayton Flyers. That's a team that's done pretty well. They just lost to Loyola Chicago the other day, who's always seems to be in the running for March. We've seen it in previous years. Sister Jean's still alive and well at 104 years old. So I'm sure she'll be there to try and cheer on the team if she can. I think the whole Mountain West Conference, though, has the ability to succeed in March. We've seen the estimations, and this team is expected to have 6 teams in March and participate in the madness. And that to me is just shocking because the Mountain West Conference, who would have ever guessed? You got teams like San Diego State, they always seem to be there, especially after last year's national championship run. But then you've got teams like Colorado State, you've got teams like Nevada, Boise State, this conference, Utah State, all these teams that aren't necessarily the biggest of names, but still have the ability to win, and we've seen it this season, is just, it's actually kind of interesting. And then I think the one that everyone always goes to, especially since they've gotten a lot of media, they've been seen a lot in the media, is Indiana State. As an Indiana native, obviously I know what Indiana State is. This team has the potential to win, I think. Robbie Avila, he's a terrific basketball player. And this team, was ranked there for a little bit. And obviously, maybe the ranking got to them a little bit as they lost 1 or 2 games after that. But this team has the ability to win. And so I think with March, it's so special because we've seen it in previous years. You've got the 15, the 16 seeds winning games against some of the best teams in the nation. And it's all because of that grit. It's that mentality. It's that knowing, we hear it in the song One Shining Moment. It's all on the line. You've got the one chance to put your name in the record books, to live immortality there for a little bit. So I think that March I'm super excited for. We'll probably talk about it a little bit more on a different podcast, or on a podcast in later episodes, especially since we still don't know the teams. I think once the March Madness bracket drops, I'll drop an episode specifically for that, where I'll give you my opinions on different games, different matchups, and who I think is going to win. We talked about the Jags already. With NHL, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because this is the main reason why I started to get into NHL. And it's because of the 1980 Olympic hockey match between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. And I know this is such a random array of sports that we're talking about here in my first podcast, but this game is one of the most important games, and I believe in American history. The United States was in some doubt, especially with hockey, because this team had struggled in previous years, and especially since the Soviet Union was as good as it was. So in this time, we were having a gas shortage. The Cold War was going on, so obviously there was some tension between the Soviets and the United States of America. This was an important game. The head coach, Herb Brooks, may he rest in peace, he made the team in 1960. And this United States team went on to win the gold cup. The gold medal. However, he was not a part of that winning, as he was cut in the final week before the Olympics started. And so you knew, especially if you've seen the movie Miracle, one of my favorite movies, you knew that mentality that he would probably have. We got to win, we got to participate, we got to play hard, and we just got to do what we got to do to win. And like they said in the movie, the Soviet Union may have won 9 out of 10 games, but it was all about that one game. And I love that speech in the movie, but it was a heck of a game. The Soviet Union losing 3-4 against the United States, and the United States would come back on 3 separate occasions, getting outshot 16-39. And finding a way to win, and it's just unbelievable to me. And the famous Al Michaels line, a broadcaster who I deeply admire, "Do you believe in miracles?" And I just think that that's super important because it does show you, especially in the sports world, there are mottos like any team can win on any given day. And it's so true, though. We've seen it in March, especially. We see it a lot during March. We see it in the NFL season. We see it in the MLB. I wouldn't say we see it as much in the NBA because it's a lot of star-studded teams. But any team can win, and I think that's super important when it comes to sports. And I think that's what makes sports so interesting and so intriguing, is because of that fact that you can have any team win. All right, so I talked about Miracle a little bit, not a whole lot, but if anyone is interested in Miracle or a Miracle episode, go to the YouTube channel, go to the Instagram, let me know in the comment section. I'd be super intrigued and super interested to make an episode about that. On the next episode, we'll probably just talk about sports during the week, especially if we do one later in the week. It'll probably just be next week, especially since I'm just starting out. But I appreciate you all for listening. If you have, make sure to check out the Instagram at MTC Sports Podcast. Check out the YouTube at Making the Cut Sports Podcast as well. And then also on Spotify at the same name. I appreciate you all, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And I hope you enjoy some sporting events.